No one has thrown a chair, no one has sworn at me today, but the behaviour's not been there for the learning.
My line and your line might be two different places, but as long as the line stays the line.
I think one of the reasons that we have so many people struggling with stress, worry over behaviour, thinking, do I want to be a teacher anymore, is down to that feeling of powerlessness that you can feel when you're going through the same cycle day in, day out, struggling with behaviour. You're thinking, yeah, I want it to be like that. I want it to be calm and controlled, and everyone's safe and is able to learn, but it's just not happening. Or what's the struggle here? What's the challenge here? What would success really look like in this situation?
Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time-poor but enthusiasm-rich primary teachers. This week, we begin a new 4-part mini-series exploring behaviour in primary schools. Now, across the next 4 Saturdays, we're going to move from the challenges teachers are experiencing through the deliberate teaching of behaviour and the role of senior leaders, before finishing by examining how schools create cultures in which good behaviour becomes the norm. Now, to begin, I'm joined once again by Charles Benkowitz for an episode titled Why Behaviour Feels Harder Than Ever. Now, Charles is always an excellent person with whom to open up a difficult subject. And he brings it the honesty of someone still doing the work every day, the perspective that comes from reflecting really carefully on his own practice, and a willingness to resist what I think easy answers that discussions about behaviour so often produce. Now, together we explore what teachers actually mean when they say behaviour is getting worse, why the same behaviour can feel very different in different classrooms, and what happens to teachers when they begin to feel powerless to improve things. Now, the episode doesn't attempt to settle every debate. Instead, it establishes the complexity that the rest of the series needs to confront. Now, all 4 episodes are available to Ko-fi supporters right now, and you can access the complete mini-series by subscribing at Tier 3 at kofi.com/TDAPE. That's ko-fi.com/TDAPE, and becoming a member of the Thinking Deeply About Primary Education Club, which we should probably start calling it. Now, very special, 1st of August, tickets for TDAPE Edinburgh go on sale today, August 1st, with full details available through Eventbrite and the usual TDAPE channels. There's a link in the description for anyone listening. And that's going to be a fantastic day of professional learning hosted in Edinburgh. So looking forward to taking the TDAPE conference to Scotland for the first time. Thank you to Kirsten and Holly for making that possible. Lots of great speakers across a massive range of topics. And we'll share those on social media over the coming weeks. But without further ado, let's spend some time thinking deeply about primary education. So, Charles, it's lovely to see you again. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Kieran. Thanks so much for having me back on the podcast. It's a pleasure. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's your annual jaunt to talk to us about that. I mean, it seems like behaviour is becoming your area of expertise. But yeah, looking forward to kicking off this mini series with all things about your experience this last academic year.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's something we're all thinking about a lot. So yeah, good idea to spend the summer delving into it a bit.
Absolutely. And so I think, the context over the next couple of weeks, there are going to be lots of explorations of behavior for learning, behavior management, different ways different people in challenging circumstances sort of approach it. But I thought to set the scene, we'd almost use a paper, I think, that was published in the last 12 months by Panthy, Thorpe, Huon, Casey, and Staton, called The Challenges of Challenging Behaviour, Early Childhood Educators' Understandings of Child Behaviour and Impact on Occupational Wellbeing. I mean, not the worst title, but it's almost going to be the backdrop, because they did a study and they looked at teachers' experiences, whereas normally we look at pupils' experiences. They were actually asking questions about pupils. And I suppose the first question that arose from it was, when teachers say behaviour is getting worse, what do they mean?
Whether it's youth, I mean, I remember when we were at secondary school, even then there was always the perception that, oh, the year sevens this year, or they're even as a year, 15-year-old, like, oh, they're so rude, or they're so this or so that. And then as teachers, whether you're reading things put out by the unions on the emails or in the news, there is always this perception that behavior is getting worse in general. It's such a hard one to say if it actually is. We're all of us, we're just going off our own subjective experiences. And but I guess it's things like, are we feeling more stressed ourselves as educators in the classroom, managing challenging behavior? The article itself, it made, well, maybe quite an obvious point, but something that we might not think about that often, the idea that what is challenging behavior is subjective. What you might think of as a nice, healthy bubble of chatter while their pupils are getting on with their maths reasoning problems, I might see as an intolerable level of noise, or vice versa, more likely. I'm sure a lot of that comes down to personality as well, our own experiences or expectations. One thing I've reflected on quite a lot this year as a teacher is how most, not all, but most teachers had a fairly steady time in school. They were maybe not the ones who were always rubbing up against the consequences side of the behavior management policy. You're getting your dojos, or whatever it was back then, stickers on the chart. So it can be quite hard, I think, for those of us who were in that camp to really understand why a pupil or group of pupils would not want to behave in the way that we have in our mind is good behavior conducing to learning. Maybe there's an element as well, this is totally subjective, so feel free to just swap this away like a fly, but as you get older sometimes, or have more years in the profession, maybe your levels of patience can just decline a little bit naturally, or what you expect there and then gets more, your expectations can get higher. But I think what we have, those of us who listen to Tadape, who are having more and more of this kind of CPD, which is coming in, where we know that attention is crucial to learn anything. We know that if pupils are not at a very minimum tracking the speaker, tracking the board, showing the kind of learning behaviors that you might want, like whether it's taking notes, writing an answer on their whiteboard, getting ready to show with finger voting what they're going to answer. If they're not doing that as a minimum, it's going to be very, very hard for them to learn anything. So I think our expectations have to be super high. And then if they're not, we know that they're not learning anything, or probably not learning anything, or at least not what we're hoping they would learn. And so we're instantly no one has thrown a chair, no one has sworn at me today, but the behavior's not been there for the learning. So I think there's a whole combination of things, obviously, and there will be people on this series as well who would talk about maybe the more extreme end of the challenges that many teachers might face. There'll be some teachers who think, well, they behave for me, what a line. And there'll be some teachers who everything in between. But yeah, behavior is getting worse is definitely a sentiment that you can see in whatever you're reading and in the people you talk to at the moment.
And I mean, obviously the reason I put this question in first, because obviously the authors of this paper, they come with their own preconceptions, they come with their own definitions. They talk about how disruption of learning across the classroom with a measurable impact on teacher well-being. But that is going to be different for everyone, because I remember, like, when I was 22 and I wanted to be the kid's friend, my behavior management was shocking. And so my tolerance back then, because I didn't have the strategies, I just had to get on with it. And so the disruption, there were classes that were learning much less than maybe say 5 years in when I actually got the hang of, okay, they just want to feel safe. They want to feel like they know where the line is. And like you said, my line and your line might be two different places, but as long as the line stays the line, that's the, if I'm obviously, this is me being really subjective in terms of how I think this season's going to go, this mini series is going to go. But just to say that, I think everything that we discuss about behavior will be subjective because it's all relative. It's relative to the class you have. It's relative to the school you're in, the SLT you have. And just generally, like you say, back in the day, I mean, behavior in my comprehensive school was, the stories, that could be a podcast in itself.
Yeah.
Some of the things happened. I mean, I'm pretty sure there are non-disclosure agreements for some of the things that went on. And so I don't go into them, but I think we just need to think about actually, okay, whether it's worse or not, it is what it is. And like you say, we want as many pupils as possible, if not the absolute majority of them, paying attention to the new learning. And so, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's fascinating you're talking about the fact that, perhaps because we know more about how important attention is, perhaps our tolerance drops. I don't know, maybe that's it. Maybe that greater awareness of our role in the classroom comes with actually, hold on, we know how important it is that you're missing this right now. I don't know, could that be something?
Would you say that when you're, in your early years, 22-year-old teacher, say you want to be the kid's friend or you want to be the fun teacher, but do you think you were more stressed about behavior in the classroom, or it had a greater impact on your sort of opinion of yourself as a successful teacher then, or maybe 5, 8, 10 years in when you felt like you were getting the hang of it a bit more?
So my first school, I worked for best part of 7 or 8 years in a really challenging area of high socioeconomic deprivation. And I was feeling as a teacher in terms of behavior management, I wasn't, but I felt like a failure every day with challenging behavior, more than 1 or 2 pupils who were seriously disruptive, and maybe half the classes being, what they call low-level disruption, but it's still disruption, And so I was having to manage a lot, and I didn't have the tools. Now, the school supported me really well, and like I say, I think 3-4 years in, I was getting much better at it. And I think, I always describe it as learning the hard way, but I think I'm reasonably good. I've got a reasonably solid set of strategies because I teach a lot of classes that aren't my own, because a lot of the training I do, I go into other people's classes, and you need to establish those routines. You need to establish the expectations quickly. So I think it's been a good thing in the long run, but I was going home every night wondering whether I was still going to be a teacher the next day or not for the first 3 years, guaranteed first 3 years. And I've said it, and I don't mind saying that. I was all like, is this it? And I blame myself. I never for 1 second blame the kids, because they were coming with all their baggage, and they needed someone who was better, who was good at their job. So for me, in my early days, really struggled, real challenge. But I had a lot of supportive people who helped me get to the point where I'd say, after 5 years, I definitely felt like, okay, maybe we can focus on pedagogy now. And then after 10 years, maybe I'm not so bad at this teaching job after all.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because that chimes a lot with this article that we're reading, which, in its very long title, it links. It's looking at the link between behavior and occupational well-being, which you could definitely include in that. Do I want to be a teacher anymore? Am I able to do this? And it looks at the idea of causality. So is the cause something that I have any control over or not of the challenging behavior? And if I'm misquoting any of this, sorry to the authors, but I did. I'm trying my best. But that they're saying that most people who answered the survey in their research said that the external factors were the big things driving the behavior. No one's going to be surprised at that. I wouldn't have thought. But it also then goes into the idea of changeability, or does the teacher believe that they have any agency or any power to influence this behavior at all? And I think maybe where a lot of us will have been, or probably nearly every teacher at some point, when it feels most challenging is when you feel like there's not really much I can do, or what I am doing, maybe I can get a bit better, but maybe it's just the background, or it's just what they're getting at home, or it's just there's too many challenges in one room and not enough support. And I'm not saying definitely not saying that's the right attitude, but I think one of the reasons that we have so many people struggling with stress, worry over behavior, thinking, do I want to be a teacher anymore, is down to that feeling of powerlessness that you can feel when you're going through the same cycle day in, day out, struggling with behavior.
One of the most damaging things leaders can do is hold teachers responsible for outcomes without giving them the tools to influence those outcomes. And that's true of behavior, and it's true of mathematics. Now, the story of mathematics curriculum resources give teachers far greater control over what happens next. There's a clear sequence, carefully constructed small steps, likely misconceptions, purposeful representations, questions, and assessment. It doesn't tell teachers to teach for depth and then leave them to work out what that means. It turns that ambition into something they can plan, teach, and evaluate. Because asking every teacher to construct a coherent curriculum in the gaps between everything else is not professional autonomy. It's simply handing the hardest decisions back to the people with the least time to make them. Now, if you want a curriculum that strengthens teacher expertise rather than consuming it, get in touch today through the link in the show notes, or email us at support@alta-education.com. And lots of the respondents, I think you're absolutely spot on, because lots of respondents, they saw the causes outside of a lot of them outside of their control, like I said, home life, neurodevelopmental factors, wider circumstances. How much control do you think teachers should feel they have over behavior?
Well, we often talk about, to coin a phrase, running the room, or the teacher being the adult in the classroom. So in that sense, surely you've got to have control. If you don't have control, but a 9-year-old has control, and they're the best will in the world, they're not the person who needs to be in control in that situation, or at least in control of the whole room. Maybe again, coming back to personality, if you were someone maybe like myself who likes everything to feel like it's going smoothly and calmly all the time, then maybe we have to reflect. You can't, things like, I know it's cliche after cliche here on the podcast today, but you can't win every single battle, or when to, which one to choose. Maybe for other people, less like myself, so tread more carefully, but who need to take a little bit more control, or maybe the philosophies behind that. Maybe there are some ideas that actually it's even cruel to expect children to follow rules, or to have to be silent. I think it's Tom Bennett saying you have to walk down a corridor silently is some kind of fascism. Obviously misquoting him there. But maybe I don't know if that's quite what you're getting at with the question. So yeah.
I mean, obviously there are definitely ways to interpret control, but I mean, in my mind, when I think of how much control should teachers have over behavior, is the class, I think whenever the class aren't listening to the teacher, then things aren't safe. And whenever they're not following instructions the way they should be, things aren't safe. And when we talk about what our responsibility in school is, it's safe, happy learning. Those are the three things. And I think safe and safeguarding are the very first thing, because it's the most important. So I actually think, because the teachers who were asked, they felt they had very little control over whether they could get better and whether they could control their classes. But I do feel as teachers, we whether you like a little bit of noise, or whether you like active participation in different ways and stuff, or whether you like silent classrooms, and I think you need to know that when you say something, that thing happens, or we give an instruction, that thing happens, because it could be the difference between an injury and not an injury. I mean, anecdotally, when I go to schools and the behavior in the corridors is less than optimum, it's normally, I'm not saying, I know there's going to be a correlation causation thing here, but it's normally quite a good indicator that things need to improve on a number of different levels, and normally strategic leadership is one of them. Like I say, that's just anecdotal, but when I visit schools where silent corridors are in effect, basically what you've got are really polite children holding the door open for adults, holding them open for each other, taking turns walking on the right side of the corridor, and transitioning quietly between rooms when they have to transition. It's hardly fascist in the way that it gets portrayed on social media. But its absence is a really good, for me, a really good indicator of what's going wrong in the school. I'm not thinking of any one particular school, but I know that when I visit schools and there are kids jumping around and sort of swinging or being rude or shouting in the corridor, it's usually a sign that a lot needs to be improved. I don't know. And maybe, like I say, anecdotal, certainly not evidence, because we know that anecdotal evidence is an oxymoron. But I think, like you're saying, I think the control that you want to feel over your class, I think that's the minimum we should expect to feel over, and I know it's not always possible.
Yeah.
I certainly haven't always had that control, but I think it's what we're aiming for, I don't know if do you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's also, some people listening to this who are teaching will be working in an area where the challenges are significantly higher or significantly lower when it comes to behavior. So I remember my second class was the dream class for behavior, and I realized back then that it was never going to get better than this. I'm sure, I don't know who I'm accidentally quoting there. It's not Tony Blair, is it? I don't know. Probably not. You can delete that bit, delete all of it if you want. But if you're in a class where already the children have come in, are little angels, they want to learn. Oh, what are we doing first, Mr. Benkowitz? Oh, we're going to do some handwriting. Oh, yes, I love handwriting. Oh, cracking. Or whatever it would be. You're a teacher in that class. You're going to think, oh, silence in the corridor, it's not going to do any harm. Whereas if you're in a school with much greater challenges, where the absence of that kind of control means that it's not safe, then I suppose it's a question, should you have different standards for different schools? But the pragmatic reality is sometimes you have to. I mean, I don't know, maybe some people listening would have seen clips of this. I can't remember what his name is, but there was a head teacher. I thought the strictest head teacher in Britain used to be at what's it called, Michaela School in London, but apparently now it's someone else in Wales. And he was on, I don't know if he'd been on ITV or something. Other terrestrial channels are available. Always wanted to say that. And he was saying that if a child is repeatedly disruptive in a lesson, secondary school, they call the parents and ask the parents to come and sit with that child in the classroom. And you could probably find similar ends of the spectrum, and people will listen to that and either think, yeah, come on, we need more of that, or be outraged. So I guess the point I'm making, or at least started off making, was it can really depend on your context. But maybe if people are listening to this who, like myself, have really struggled with behavior over time, you're thinking, yeah, I want it to be like that. I want it to be calm and controlled, and everyone's safe and is able to learn, but it's just not happening. Or I feel like I'm not set up to fail, but there's so many factors making this such an uphill battle. And I reckon there probably are lots of people out there. So I would want to say, especially if you're new or first year PGC, thinking you're definitely not alone. And yeah, don't give up. Let's keep talking about it and learn from each other. So there are some cliches again to help you But I think, yeah, we've got to start by being honest, is what I'm saying. We've got to be honest about the challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tony Blair was Things Going to Get Better, wasn't it? D-Ream, or A17 or something like that. That was the theme tune for their election, because obviously things couldn't really get worse than what they were prior to 1997. I think ITV has been bought by someone. I think is either Sky or Fox, and they've only guaranteed that it will be free to watch until 2028. So we may have fewer terrestrial television channels going forward. You know, I mean, obviously all those great shows like I don't know, what's the one about the people drive around the country looking for antiques and stuff like that there, you know. How will we survive without that, and Midsummer Murders and Heartbeat and Coronation Street?
Yeah, you're a fount of knowledge. I had no idea.
Yeah. So that's any other business. But no, I think I think you're absolutely spot on. I mean, yeah. So I'm not going to cut your bit about Tony Blair, because you know we always love a segue or a tangent.
Just bring them on.
A policy is only useful when it gives teachers greater clarity and control, and the same is true of assessment. ACEL Pro helps schools see what pupils actually know, what remains insecure, and what each pupil should rehearse next. It's not built around one curriculum or one commercial scheme. We have done the painstaking work of correlating the mathematics across major national standards, so it works whether you teach in England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, Australia, or New York. Your curriculum may determine how the content is organized and described, but ACEL Pro gets underneath those labels to the mathematics pupils need to learn. Find out more at acel.pro. That's ACEL.pro. So I think next question is, I mean, last time with Liv and Tom, we spent a lot of time talking about almost senior responsibility for behavior. So, but this next question almost probes that a little bit further. Are behavior policies solving problems or shifting responsibility? What are your takes on that? I mean, that might be loaded. So maybe if you try and imagine a hypothetical situation, so you don't have to analyze your own. You can obviously use the report, because they had some pretty strong thoughts on the use of behavior policies.
Yeah, obviously, as usual, any views expressed entirely my own and not representative of anyone I've ever worked for, ever, or ever will do. At some undefined point over my career, which will not be identified, yeah, definitely, because last time we discussed the merits of the phrase all behavior is communication, and I've definitely felt like that is a phrase that can make the teacher feel like if the behavior is not what you want it to be, it's because you are not understanding the pupils in enough depth or reading that communication accurately. Now that may be true, we might not be doing that, but then I think a lot of teachers might feel that we just don't have the resources, either within ourselves or within the classroom, to be able to read that communication appropriately and respond in a way that's going to raise the standards within the classroom of behavior and help and get everyone where they need to be. Maybe also if it says it in a policy, you can feel like there's no unless you followed it perfectly every single time, again, it might be your fault. Now, no one has ever told me that personally, and hopefully most leaders are kind of aware enough and sensitive and encouraging and supportive enough to be able to see a little bit past that. So in short, no, I don't think they usually are shifting responsibility by having a policy, this, but it's got to go beyond that to thinking we've got to, let's be really honest. What's the struggle here? What's the challenge here? What would success really look like in this situation? So teachers don't end up feeling like, even though they're trying everything they can try, they're constantly in that position of feeling like they're failing.
because in the report they sort of talked about how organizational behavior policies can sometimes leave teachers feeling less able to influence behavior. And like, but whenever this challenged me, because whenever I think about it, like I mentioned like the first 6 months of my first job, I don't think I'd even read the behavior policy. And so 6 months in, I think it was like an NQT review or whatever, and all, why aren't you implementing this? And so my reaction was, right, okay, it's all very clearly laid out how we should approach managing behavior in the classrooms. I've not been listening here. No one told me I was not doing my job properly, but I hadn't been aware that this was a thing that I had to do. So for me, once I did that, things started to improve. But over the years, I've almost reflected, right, okay, even like my interpretation of it will be different to other people. We talked about subjectivity. And so at best, all you can hope for is that the kids, when they go across the school, are seeing some similar, reasonably similar version of behavior management. Because it's not going to be identical. You know, even like things like the number of warnings. Someone will give 3 warnings and then a consequence, or someone will give 2 warnings and then the third is a consequence. And no one ever really discusses the minutiae of when not. But what it can't be is that you go into one classroom and the teacher is joking and laughing, and then all of a sudden you're gone and you're sitting in nursery for the rest of the day. Or the other, and then the other 5 classes, you've got the teachers trying their best to muddle through it. You know, it's all or nothing. So that bit of the paper, you know, it's I hadn't seen that, but obviously I've not worked in every school and certainly haven't worked in the Southern Hemisphere. But I thought that the behavior policies, when they're really clear about the routines and the expectations that we have, you know, then I think they can be really helpful. They've certainly been really helpful for me. But, you know, I certainly don't want to speak for all teachers. You know, it might just be my very subjective situation.
So in that sense, we're talking about consistency, aren't we? And that can go a long, long way to really helping a school as a whole. Because as with anything in behavior, if you are feeling like you're doing it on your own, or you're going out on a limb, or it's whatever works for you in your classroom, then it's an uphill battle, I would say.
What do you think would genuinely help a teacher facing challenging behavior on Monday morning?
What I've been reflecting lately is there often seems to be a kind of what would you call it, like a no man's land in behavior, or a gray zone, or an in-between. And I'll explain what I mean by that. In that we all know what serious behavior looks like. A pupil injuring another pupil, shouting and swearing at someone, racist abuse. You know, we think insert here any really serious behavior, and then we all know, well, even though it may be subjective, we all know what we think ideal behavior is like: joining in with the lesson, pupils being respectful to each other, tracking the speaker, being quiet when it's time to be quiet, etc. But then, like you mentioned earlier, what about those low-level disruptions, turning around, having a chat, being a bit off topic? You're supposed to be lining up in silence, but just having a chat again, and again, like what you might describe, maybe not especially charitably, but the dripping tap all day, all week, all term, all year. So it's that middle zone where maybe teachers feel like they are being overly punitive if they follow maybe the consequences on the behavior policy for seemingly trivial or minor things. Oh, what are you doing in here again? Missing 10 minutes of your playtime, Billy. Sorry, Billy. I only whispered to my friend to ask if I could borrow a pencil sharpener. That seems very unfair, but who's your teacher again? Oh, it's Mr. Benkowitz. Oh, I see. You know, and you're kind of in that middle zone where it's lots of not super serious stuff. So what could I think I would ask as a normal teacher, leadership teams to be thinking about: how can I support my teachers in that, and be really clear about what you expect them to address, or how you expect them to address it, and maybe take away some of that ambiguity of, yeah, you are being a bit harsh there, or no, you're not being, you need to just nip these things in the bud, and this is how you can do it. So that's not super practical, but I think that's the area that for many teachers can be quite demoralizing or challenging over the course of their career.
I think the two things, probably, I'm not sure if I've mentioned either of them to any great extent in the podcast, but in the past, but particularly where you've got challenging classrooms, where you've got challenging cohorts. I think the two things that have worked for me are developing as much non-verbal communication as possible. Because the moment you get in an argument with the pupil, there's only one loser, and that's you. So I would often have post-it note in my pocket. I would outline the expectations, but I'm not going to spend the class going, okay, you do need this, you need to do this, you need this. And I do this at home too. I just make a note. And then when it comes time for the consequence, I'll say, okay, the following pupils, you're going to stay with me. Says during, I mean, it's probably not during lunchtime, but you're going to be doing X instead of Y. You're going to be this is the consequence for your choice. And we won't have discussed it before, but they'll know it's because of something they've done. And then we can talk about what, the full extent of it during that consequence. So as much non-verbal communication as possible, and that can be positive in terms of your instruction as well. So people know when you stand beside a certain part of the board that you're about to speak, and when you're not there, then that's their turn to engage in thinking, that kind of thing. And then I suppose the one that might be most helpful is that when things break down, regroup, find a different strategy, and try and get that to work for as long as possible. Because particularly with classes who have either had a number of years where their behavior has not been managed, or they've not been given a reason to make the right choices as a group, as a cohort, then almost the trust in the adults and the trust in the safety of the system isn't there, and so they are perhaps naturally inclined to push and test. And so you might establish something for 6 weeks, and then things, as they'll start to test again, I think actually, no one's ever stuck around for longer than a term before, so let's really push and then another strategy, let's see how long that works for, and that kind of thing. So because sometimes 1 year might not be enough to establish or to reboot the behavior in a class, but you can help yourself by constantly regrouping. And I do it with my kids all the time. When one chart runs out and stops working, well, what's the next strategy we're going to use? Or maybe they just get older and they need an older strategy, or they're a bit developmentally, they actually need something a bit younger. Because I definitely know children who responded really well to the things I put in place for toddlers, but a 10-year-old responds really well to it, and they don't feel to mean it. It just happened to work. So you're always thinking about, what are the strategies I've got at my disposal? Because if one thing doesn't work, well, what else have I got in my toolkit? And then it's just, it is eventually just about getting through to July, and then fingers crossed, the next year group, they're in a better place. And you normally find you're paying it forward. The number of times I've had a class and I've had to spend the year really establishing those expectations, and then they go into year 6, or they go into year 5, and they're a dream to teach. Well, that's because you've done the hard work, So those are the two things, non-verbal communication and try again, because, I think that's all we can do, because I think what we want to do is we want to help the kids. We want to help them. And the way we do that is by thinking about how we can support them in developing positive behaviors and then regulating their own behavior. But that's a journey. That's not overnight. And certainly if things at home aren't right, that's almost, that's more than one person can do it, and you do need everybody else. I don't know. So those would be my two things. Like I say, I mean, teachers in Australia, you are going to school on Monday morning. Teachers in the Northern Hemisphere, you're probably on a break and thinking, okay, in September I can start from scratch and go bang. Yes, this is me establishing my routines. But like you say, it's shades of challenge, and it's all relative to your experience. And David Dagdar says, the longer you've been in a school, the more likely they are to behave for you, because you've got that operational respect that teachers so badly need.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think that'll help a lot of people listening. I think there's that there are so many mysteries that lie beneath the surface, and you think, well, one adult stands up at the front of the line, does raises the hand, silence in the blink of an eye. Another teacher, usually me, stands up at the front of the line, and I'm waiting. Thank you, Millie. Well, I can see Tilly's, and I'm waiting. And, and it's 4:30 and everyone else has gone home, and, your tea's going cold or whatever. And we're still waiting. So I think there are so many things like that. And yeah, that's such a good point, isn't it? Sometimes even just the very fact that you've been in the school for 5 years, or you have a certain gravitas that follows you. I guess I know I'm not the interviewer, but I don't get on this very often, so I'm gonna ask my question is where did you say you draw the line with things like non-verbal signals? How long are you waiting? Maybe you tap the desk, but maybe if they're the back of the room, at what point do you use a verbal signal, say a name, or would you never? You might not just have one, you might have 8 people as you're waiting for.
I think we need to wait longer than we like to. It becomes almost uncomfortable. But I will also use like facial expressions. I will take pens. I'll walk around the room as I'm waiting for silence, and I will take a pen and put the lid back on, and it'll be very clear from that action that they knew exactly what was going on there. And we'll just sort of we'll wait, and it will be uncomfortably long. It'll probably be like 20 seconds. But if a child is really clearly deciding, then perhaps me and the teaching assistant work together on some sort of strategy. It depends on what is happening. But I think in the main, I will tip. It's been quite a while. It's been about a number of years since I've had to really do that. But when I was working across 3 schools, my last sort of full-time role, whenever people were volunteering for support, behaviour and maths were things on the agenda, and obviously you can't do the maths. Let's improve our maths teaching if the kids aren't behaving. So there was a lot of that, and a lot of overemphasizing. I am going to wait. I'm not going to waste my voice. I'm not going to spend my time talking over you, because eventually you'll realize that what I say isn't important. And so I've read people like Ollie Lovell, I think, talking about his routines and how he's always reestablishing them all the time. And I think we mentioned last time that reestablishing is something we can never do enough or too much of. But as teachers, we typically don't like silence, and we don't like waiting. But I would say wait longer than you feel comfortable, because eventually, and just using your facial expressions, not like a mean face, but just like a exasperation, or like looking at your watch kind of thing, and then but also making a note and then explaining, right, we had to wait for 5 minutes for you, so you're going to give me that 5 minutes now. Simple natural consequence. Well, maybe not a natural consequence, because those are the things that happen when kids do the wrong thing, aren't they? But an expected consequence. Okay, you waste my time, I'll waste yours. To finish on it's not a cliche, it's not my time you're wasting, is it?
Yeah, I would refer anyone for the it's your own time you're wasting, etc. All those teacher sayings to the Peter Kay sketch. It always cracks me up every time, that one.
So it's been I think this has been a really good primer for what's to come, because I think we've opened a lot of doors, picked a lot of scabs. Hopefully there are people listening thinking, oh, maybe there is some light at the end of the tunnel, because I reckon most of us go, if not all of us, go through this. Probably the only ones who don't either were working in the school and have done the school to teacher transition, or almost like pathway, or had a parent who was a teacher, and they've explained how they've seen firsthand how difficult it is. So we've all been through it, and we will all get through it. But hopefully over the next couple of weeks, we'll look at ways that people who are working in those challenging circumstances have established really positive ways of thinking. So all that's left to do, Charles, is say thank you very much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's been a good chat.
And everyone at home, until next time, thanks for listening.